Today, we're going to look at autism spectrum disorder. We'll begin to see what the DSM-5 says about autism and move past some of those stereotypes that we've understood since childhood. We'll also look at what the spectrum means. It's not this bar graph, but a spiky profile. We'll talk exactly about what that means. Afterwards, we'll look at masking and autism through genders and some co-occurring conditions. At the end of the training, you'll actually find a worksheet that's building your own spiky profile. Mine looks something like this, but what this means for your brain, we're going to get into a little bit later in the video. So if you're interested in learning more about autism spectrum disorder and what it really means about your brain, this video is for you. We're going to take a look at what the DSM-5 says about the autism spectrum disorder. I think it's really important to note that the DSM-5 has an updated version that really categorizes a lot of disorders together, while the DSM-4 had separate disorders. So in the DSM-4, we had a separate autism disorder, Asperger's, and PDD. But in the recent version that came out in 2013, all of these were grouped together. This is important to note because some people still prefer to go by the term of Asperger's because they did receive that diagnosis. And while maybe our language has updated and changed, but for a lot of people, that was a lifeline. That was something that they were finally able to understand their brain for and understand why it functions so differently for the first time. And because of that, it can be really difficult to release that title or that language. One of the ways I approach this is while in a lot of my conversations, I do use autism spectrum disorder. If someone blatantly asks me to call them or to refer to them as having Asperger's, I'm happy to provide that and do that for them because that's how they identify themselves. So it's important to remember that we need to address the individual, how they want to be addressed. But as we go through the rest of this video, we're going to look at current DSM-5 language and classification for the autism spectrum disorder. So if you watch the ADD video, you'll see that the classifications was very different than this in autism. For autism, we go by what's considered domains. There's two separate domains for the autism spectrum. The first is social communication or interaction domain, and the second is repetitive behaviors and sensory domain. For the first domain of the social communication and interactions, you actually have to be able to check all three of these off. But as we move through the domain B, which is the repetitive behaviors, and the sensory domain, you only need to check two. So on your screen, you're going to see everything for domain A. If I move too fast, feel free to pause this and check this out. But basically, the first part of domain A is a deficient in social emotional reactions. So this can look like abnormal social approaches, reduced back and forth conversations, maybe a reduction in sharing interest and emotion, and then maybe a failure to respond socially in a conversation. The next section of domain A is nonverbal communication behaviors. This can look like avoiding eye contact, body language, trouble understanding gestures, and a lack of facial expressions. So the third area in domain A is developing and maintaining and understanding relationships. This can be a difficulty adjusting behaviors in social context or sharing imagination play in children, as well as trouble making friends or interacting with peers. For the autism diagnosis, according to the DSM-5, you need to be able to check all three of these boxes in domain A. Now let's move into domain 2. This is the restricted repetitive behaviors, interests, or activities. For this domain, you will require to check two of the boxes. The first one we're going to review is stereotypes or repetitive behaviors. This can be speech and objects. A lot of times we refer to this as stemming. It can be flapping your hands or maybe lining up objects in a certain order. But we see a lot of repetitive behaviors and we see a lot of repetitive use of objects in this one. The second one is instances on sameness. So inflexible routines, using the same behaviors. In adults, this can be maybe wearing the same thing every day or eating the same lunch. It can also be not willing to adjust routines. If you have a schedule set out for the day, it can be really difficult to adjust that midday or have some changes come up midday. The third one is highly restricted and fixated interest. So this is a real intense, abnormal focus on a narrow topic. Typical ADHD questionnaires will ask you something like, do you have a direct interest in trains. And it doesn't have to be about trains. It can be about anything, whether you're into certain sci-fi television shows, whether you're into boats or planes or trains. There's something that is a deep-seated, fixated interest that you can talk on for hours, and you tend to know more than the average person, a lot more. And the fourth one of domain B is hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input. So this can be noises, textures, the way clothes feel on you, sounds, repetitive sounds that most people can turn off, or maybe how bright the lights are can really affect how much you focus or your productivity. So when you look at the DSM-5, there are 2 domains. You need to check 3 out of box A and 2 out of box B in order to be diagnosed with autism according to the DSM-5. Next, we're going to take a look at what a autism spectrum is and really drill down into a spiky profile. So when we talk about autism, a lot of times you'll hear something called Autism Spectrum Disorder. And when we think about a spectrum, we normally think either about a bar chart where you're less autistic on one side and more autistic on the other, or like maybe a volume where you can turn it and you're more autistic, so you turn it higher, or less autistic, so you turn it lower. And that's not autism spectrum at all. What it really looks like is more of a graduate, like a colorful circle where you have a lot of different things interacting. It looks like a spiky profile. This is what a spiky profile looks like. If you look at the blue octagon, you'll see that this is what a normal pattern looks like, where they have about the same strengths and weaknesses across the board. There might be a little bit of a variant, but this is how the brain functions and where someone really excels at and maybe where someone struggles at. But if you look at the yellow shape, this is a spiky profile. You can see where areas hit the outer circle and they are exceptionally strong, but you'll also see areas where they really struggle. This is really where the autism spectrum disorder comes in. Well, everyone has a spiky profile. The people with autism or any neurodiversity tend to have greater excels in their strengths and greater challenges in the things that they struggle with compared to the neurotypical. This is really important because a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, I struggle with that too, or I feel that way too. And while that is very true, it may not be as extreme as someone with a neurodiversity, and in this case, autism. So as we look at this balanced profile versus a spiky profile, we begin to see where these struggles really come in. And what this allows us to do is not necessarily diagnose a neurodiversity, but it allows us to begin to understand where our brain really excels and what areas there might be challenges in. There's 4 profiles I want to show you. And these 4 profiles, if you look at them and you try to evaluate which one's autistic and which one's maybe ADHD or which one's neurotypical, and you begin to look through, you'll realize that they're actually all autistic. So none of them have to do with the way it's shaped. We're not saying that someone with autism has specific challenges in executive functions or only challenges in social communication, and they all present in the same way. We're saying that the profile is distinctly different. This displays where you really begin to see when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. I don't know if you've heard that saying before, but if all of these profiles on the screen are autistic, this is where it comes from. This is how it displays. This is how it shows. When you've met one autistic person, you've truly met one autistic person. Now, once again, these are not a diagnostic tool. These are help you understand your brain. If you're wondering areas that you tend to excel in and what areas you tend to struggle in, a spiky profile is a really great way for you to have a visual map to understand that. It helps people of all profiles, whether you're autistic, ADHD, or even neurotypical, to better understand their brain. And maybe it'll help you understand when to ask for support or when you need more assistance and what areas you can tend to really excel in. The point is not to fit into labels, but to understand your brain better, to learn what areas you really excel in and what areas maybe you're masking in and you could use a little more help. So when we say autism spectrum, we don't mean a little autistic or a lot autistic. We mean this unique collection of our skills, this spiky profile that highlights just how exceptional our brain is and where maybe we can use a little more support. Let's look at gender masking and the autism diagnosis. Most of the time, research was only done on young boys, which means that girls and non-binary individuals were often left out from the conversation. And this led to a lot of these individuals missing diagnoses when they were children. But we are seeing a surge in diagnoses of them today. The really reason for this is because women, especially, are really great at masking, which means they look at how individuals around them act and begin to mimic or camouflage that. They're really wonderful at maybe making eye contact when it's uncomfortable or running scripts through in their head over and over again until they're able to present themselves like everyone else. If you're in a boardroom and you see someone who looks incredibly polished, who gave a great presentation, they might have re-scripted that and rehearsed it over and over and over again, which can lead to absolute exhaustion. This is why a lot of the times women tend to lead to a lot of burnout, especially if they have autism, because they spend so much time scripting and trying to hide their autistic traits to fit in with those around us. So it can really impact their work because they do need support and they do need assistance. But from the outside, if you don't ask questions or get to know them better, it can really look like they're doing exceptional. It's really important to understand that people survive the workplace, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're thriving. It can take a change in how they function and a change in the type of work they do in order for them to really thrive in the workplace. It's important to understand about autism that the diagnosis isn't equal across genders. Historically, research was only done on boys, and therefore our understanding on girls and autism is very far behind, and we're doing our best to catch up. Masking is something that a lot of autistic people naturally do, but it does come at a cost. We'll have a lot of videos later that talk about masking, but it's important to understand what really tasks you mentally. What areas do you tend to excel at with very little effort, and what areas do you put extra effort into it? That's one of the reasons the spiky profile is so important. It lets us know where we have freedom to really excel a lot of effort and where we maybe need to hold back because this is incredibly draining to us. There are also a lot of co-occurring conditions with autism. So research shows that up to 70% of autistic individuals have at least one other condition. A lot of times it's ADHD, anxiety, depression, dyslexia, or dyspraxia are the most common co-occurring conditions. So if you are looking at someone who has an autism diagnosis or you yourself have one, it's important to look and see if there's any other symptoms that can be maybe explained by something else. Because it's not guaranteed that you have another co-occurring condition, but it is likely, 70%, that maybe you have something else that's also working with your brain. And the better that you understand your brain and how to work with it, the better we can really set you up for success in the workplace. So we've covered a lot of ground about autism spectrum disorder. We've looked at what the DSM-5 says about autism in the updated version that really released in 2013. We looked at the two domains around autism and how the diagnosis requires all three compartments of domain 1, but only 2 of the second domain. From there, we've looked at what a spectrum really means, changing perceptions from a linear bar or maybe a volume where you can be more or less autistic, to a spiky profile that really highlights our strengths and our needs thoroughly. As a part of this, I've actually created a spiky profile reflection sheet. If you're wondering what areas of your brain you excel in and what areas you may need more need, and how you can more authentically show up as yourself, and what you can do to better communicate with your peers, your bosses, and those around you on what support you need and what areas you can really take the lead and excel, this sheet is for you. If you look at my spiky profile, you begin to see that I tend to do really well in flexibility, social interest, and communication. Really well, but I struggle in pattern recognition and sensory processing. To me, what this means is I will not be really good at recognizing details, and patterns are not my thing. I will get easily overwhelmed by a lot of different noises or distractions, but I'm really great around communication. I can pick up on the difference of needs of those around me. I have great flexibility. I can roll with the punches of what comes, and then my communication skills are wonderful as well. This helps me understand how to better communicate with those around me, what I need to succeed, and what areas I can really help best in. This sheet takes about 5 minutes to complete. It's really quick, really simple. It can really help you out. On top of that, we also took a look at gender and how it can affect autism. We looked at how boys are more normally researched, so we have more information on them. But we do have more information coming out recently on how girls are affected by autism and why they mask so much more than those around them. It's important to remember that autism is not a single story. Each autistic adult brings a profile, a different set of needs, of different strengths. That diversity is how we move beyond the stereotype into real inclusion.